On the 15th of June 1904, a paddle-wheel steamboat set out on a pleasure cruise on New York City's East River.
The people along here could actually hear the music, hear the children, and it looked like such a joyous occasion.
Less than half an hour later, the General Slocum was a burned-out hulk, and more than 1,000 people were dead.
You have one of the worst possible choices, death by fire or death by drowning. These life preservers had the buoyancy of dirt, and people sank like stones.
It was New York's worst loss-of-life tragedy in the 20th century, and one that has somehow almost been forgotten. June 1904. New York City was booming. The largest public works project in American history had given its people the world's finest subway system. The city's population of 4 million exceeded every state in the Union except Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. New York's mayor, George B. McClellan, had recently renamed Longacre Square at 42nd and Broadway Times Square to curry favor with the influential New York Times. Thousands of immigrants arrived daily by transatlantic steamers lured by the low one-way fares. 75% of New York City's population was made up of immigrants or children of immigrants. But on the 15th of June 1904, tragedy hit New York City's German community. A disastrous fire aboard the steamship General Slocum had plunged an entire neighborhood into mourning. For the next 2 weeks, hundreds of funerals clogged the streets of Lower Manhattan. More than 1,000 women and children had lost their lives. 100 years later, few remember the historical facts surrounding the disaster aboard the General Slocum.
I got into the General Slocum 20-some years ago when I found out that this excursion boat burned right in the East River, and it was such a horrendous number of people lost, and fatalities.
Probably few of you have ever heard of what was New York's really greatest disaster before September 11th, the Great Fire on the steamboat General Slocum on the East River. Part of the thing that made this a more forgettable tragedy, if you want to call it that, is that these were mostly nameless, faceless, working-class people, Germans. Unlike the Titanic, which had many of the most famous Americans and very wealthy people on board, Little Germany in Lower Manhattan was a very small neighborhood, so it was a concentrated tragedy.
Throughout the 1800s, German immigrants flocked to the shores of New York City, their heads filled with dreams, their pockets empty. By 1840, the only cities with a higher German population than New York were Berlin and Vienna.
Life in Little Germany was like any other ethnic neighborhood. A vibrant, culturally rich place. Wherever you went, you heard German spoken. All the bookshops had German titles. The restaurants, the food, and the street signs were all in German. Everything was suffused with German culture. People worked very long hours, 6-7 days a week, to get ahead and to move out of that neighborhood eventually, if they could, to a better circumstance.
Strong religious belief was the backbone of Little Germany. In 1847, St. Mark's Evangelical Lutheran Church opened its doors to serve the religious needs of the German community. By 1880, its pastor was a Reverend George Haas. By then, many German immigrants had achieved financial success and moved uptown to Yorkville. By then, Little Germany had dwindled to half its original size.
Haas, he was the Lutheran minister there. He was the focal point of the whole church and the little society that existed there, that whole German enclave.
Every June, Reverend Haas hosted a Sunday school picnic, always a popular event. In 1904, it consisted of a cruise on the steamer the General Slocum, up the East River to Long Island. after a Civil War general, Henry Warner Slocum, this magnificent vessel was the pride of the Knickerbocker Steamboat Company.
Well, the General Slocum was first launched in 1891. So by 1904, it was still considered one of the more elegant of the many steamboats that plied the waters around New York. To get out of the crowded, dirty, dangerous neighborhood, but actually getting on board a steamboat, taking a glorious ride up the East River out to Long Island Sound, and then spending the whole day in fun and sun along the shore was almost too much to be believed. The General Slocum was 264 feet in length, had 2 great paddle wheels, painted bright white, 3 large, almost completely open decks, so you could really get the sense of being outdoors, being out on the water.
Commanding the Slocum was Captain William Van Schaik. In 1903, Van Schaik was presented with an award for safely carrying 30 million passengers in his career. At 66 years old, he'd earned a respectable salary and was nearing retirement. Reverend Haas couldn't have felt more at ease, his congregation securely in the hands of Captain Van Schaik.
The captain was on the boat since it was built. The captain was licensed by the Steamboat Inspection Service. The engineer had a license. Pilots had licenses. After you left that group, then it just became itinerant laborers. And they just picked them up probably the cheapest as they could get them.
June 15th, 1904, spectacular day weather-wise. There were 1,331 people on board the General Slocum, perhaps some more, but that was the official number.
They counted 2 young children as one person, and they counted 3 babies and maybe 1 person, so they really didn't have a good figure. The majority of people aboard that boat, women and children. Men either owned their own business or they worked for somebody, and they could not get the time off.
Ominous premonitions had been haunting Mrs. Philip Straub all morning, but she refused to let them ruin the trip. She'd been looking forward to it for months. She forced a smile, waved, and looked anxiously towards shore. But as the crew prepared to raise the gangplank, Mrs. Straub grabbed her children and fled.
The great majority came from the St. Mark's Parish, but there were lots of other people from the neighborhood as well, people who were not Lutheran, who were not German, so you had Italian immigrants, Irish, Jewish immigrants as well, who came sometimes at the last moment.
Various merchants in the neighborhood would buy blocks of tickets and give them out to their customers and as a promotion.
At 108 years old, survivor Catherine Connolly could still vividly remember every detail about that day.
Oh, that was a terrible thing. We were going to a little open island park for the day. And milk and ice cream was free. We had to be at the in the morning. I was 11. I was never on the boat before.
Catherine Gallagher Connolly lived on the edge of Little Germany. Her family was Irish Catholic and didn't belong to St. Mark's.
Gallagher, obviously an Irish name. I said, well, how'd you get involved with the church, which was a Lutheran church? And she said, well, I got involved from the German grocery store lady.
The grocer thanked Catherine's mother for her patronage by giving her free tickets for the Slocum trip. Catherine was disappointed when she discovered her mother was only taking her younger brother and sister. Feeling sorry for her, the grocery woman offered another ticket.
My father didn't want us to go. He was furious at the grocery lady giving her the ticket. My mother said she was never on the boat and she was going to take the children. My father said there's too many people on those boats.